Botswana is an interesting country because it's one of the few multi-party, democratic, stable governments in the whole of Africa. So you have a great natural resource and a small population. You have the ability of the government to invest in the natural resources, and you have the democratic process behind you. So what we're doing here actually has a particularly good chance of having success.
It's a spectacular wildlife area that's dynamic and always changing with the water regime and where floods go and where wildlife is able to survive.
This place is just so unique, and the ecosystem is really unique, and we've got such a large biodiversity as well. It's just a beautiful area.
This is one of the probably most beautiful places in Africa. I mean, the Okavango Delta is definitely something special. So I mean, where else one person would love to be if not here?
The watershed of the Okavango Delta comes all the way from almost northern Angola. It's collected in 4 countries into the panhandle of the delta, into the Okavango River, and it spreads out into this fan-like delta, and it stops in the Kalahari.
We've got the flood coming with the dry season. It's so different, so many contrasts, and makes everything so interesting, and it's extremely dynamic.
We're self-sufficient in terms of power and water and that sort of thing. The water system itself is from a borehole, which was known as a well. All our power is solar power, but this particular way of living is as much of why we do it as to the sort of the goals of what it is. We enjoy the field work. We enjoy driving around and chasing dogs, and we enjoy the community aspect of it and enjoy the interaction with trying to solve problems.
This field research camp here is based in a wildlife management area. It's an area that is under the lease control of a small community called the Sankuya community. Our presence here has really generated a much broader awareness of the wild dogs and an awareness about Botswana, because this is one of the last places you can actually come in Africa where you might have a good chance of seeing this species.
Tico is the coordinator of the African Wild Dog Working Group, which is a subdivision of the World Conservation Union Canid Specialist Group. And so whenever there is a question about managing wild dogs anywhere in Africa, it does come back to us and to Tico in terms of making decisions on how they should be managed. Wild dogs are not what most people think they are. They're not vicious, and they're not horrible, and they're not wanton killers, and all the things that people sometimes attribute to wild dogs.
They're also among the most endangered large carnivore species in Africa, and are still declining.
We've provided information about scientific data that's required to manage a healthy population of wild dogs and now other large carnivores in terms of habitat requirements, prey density requirements, species diversity, population numbers, whether it be for setting quotas for hunting or whether it be just for managing the areas required in order to maintain a healthy population.
The absence of wild dogs is the first indication that things are seriously not right, that the ecosystem is no longer intact. And when you start removing really important carnivores, the result is an overall general degradation of what once was a whole community. We've expanded to understand how all of the large carnivores actually live in the same places at the same time. They're all completely overlapping. They all share the same habitats in various ways, and they're all dangerous to each other.
And one of the major issues with natural resource management in this country is that there aren't specific guidelines in terms of responsibility of those that are in charge of wildlife areas and monitoring requirements. So we, myself, have been involved in writing it, and we as the Botswana Predator Conservation Trust have been designated by the government of Botswana to write, to implement, and to test the monitoring protocols that are now going to be officially required by anyone who has the right to manage and or exploit an area of the delta. And so all the projects that we've built, we feel strongly, and we're being supported by the community and by the government to keep this program going. So we will continue to be here and to continue to run it and develop it and hopefully direct it and raise money for it.
I'm from Bucharest, and I've just done a master's at the Royal Veterinary College in London, and I've just been accepted a place at the University of Oxford to do my PhD. I'm going to be looking at cheetahs and their interactions with lions and hyenas, because for my master's I did my thesis on habitat selection in cheetahs, just to see what kind of habitat they prefer. And one of the theories behind that is that they choose the habitat also according to the presence of lions and hyenas. So I'm going to be looking at that in a bit more detail.
I'm Gabriel. I'm just got introduced, accepted at the University of Zurich. So I officially started my PhD a couple of months ago. And the project is on interaction between dogs, hyenas and lions, mostly on how they influence each other habitat use and kind of movement patterns.
I'm Hugh Webster. I'm a PhD student from Sussex University, and I've been here for 4 years investigating high-frequency sound production by African wild dogs.
I am Tepo Dungi Okele, where I prefer being called Dungi. It's very expensive and very difficult to do research as a biologist here in Botswana. We have researchers coming from around the world into Botswana and doing research, and they are not Botswana. And Tico is one of the guys who is trying to help Botswana to be field researchers. And I will say, being here, it's a privilege and it's a good opportunity for me.
A great deal of Botswana is divided by what are called veterinary cordon fences. And they basically divide up large regions of Botswana into controllable disease areas. Unfortunately, that fence doesn't have a great deal of real biological meaning to the wildlife in particular, in that it's just a barrier that they have to get through or over, which they do, most animals. One of our core projects right now is to develop what we call a biologically relevant boundary or biofence. And so we're investigating the possibility of applying scent marks and scent marking chemistry to the interface between wildlife and people.
Our focus is, especially with this project, to protect otherwise endangered large carnivores from straying outside conservation areas and getting into conflict with people. Now, one of the major challenges with this kind of natural products chemistry is to tease apart the incredible complexity of what we're working with.
And one of those tools is the bioboundary, which aims to supply a synthetic, biologically relevant boundary that will limit the movement of free-roaming carnivores in order to, as I said before, keep them within the protected areas.
Where resident wildlife doesn't exist, we can try and provide virtual populations using the chemistry that the species are specifically looking for in existing neighbors.
MAUS is Maun Animal Welfare Society. The main purpose of the program is to fight against all threatening diseases transferring from domestic dogs to wild populations, and the main threats are parvo, distemper, and rabies. We still very much need to fundraise, and I would say currently the existing funding covers about 50% of the total cost.
We've got an operating theatre we didn't have, we've got a vehicle we didn't have, we've got the plans to have a full-time vet, we've got enough funding to keep her for a couple of months, and what we really want now is funding to have a team full-time for a year, because then we feel we can go from village to village, cattle post to cattle post, and really systematically work our way through the areas that need to be worked through, rather than trying to target odd villages here and there. We will be able, and we want to do an absolutely systematic coverage.
The overall long-term goal of the program is to reduce the incidence of common diseases and indiscriminate breeding of domestic animals in order to reduce the impact of disease on predators in the protected areas and wilderness habitats of northern Botswana.